You're on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So it's wonderful to see everybody here again this morning. And apologies of last Tuesday. I missed the Shia last Tuesday because I was actually flying last Tuesday. And we managed, in the Zechus of the Shia, I managed to have a successful exit from Israel and entry to the UK. But please God, we will continue learning Torah nonetheless, courtesy of virtual technology. So I'd like to have a look today. As you know, the theme of these shiurim is themes from Sefer Bereshis. And my topic throughout these shiurim has been to show that Sefer Bereshis, apart from being, of course, the Sefer of the Avos of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Yosef, in addition to that, Chazal understood that Maisa Avos Siman Labonim, which means that the events of Sefer Bereshis are in many ways a precursor, in the sense of the foundations of the whole of Jewish history. Everything that happens in Jewish history is really an unfolding of what happens in Sefer Bereshis, a bit like a seed contains the entire future tree. In every seed is contained a future tree, and like in the DNA of a single cell is the entire human being. Similarly, Bereshis is the DNA of the whole future of Jewish history. In fact, I don't think I mentioned this before, there is a Ramban on Bereshis chapter 1. Actually, Bereshis at the beginning of chapter 2, the Vayichulu Hashamayim V'Oretz V'Chol Tzava'am, which ends Ashabara Elokim La'asos. So he wants to know, what does it mean, La'asos? What does the last word of Vayichulu mean? Ashabara Elokim La'asos. So he brings down a tradition from the Zohar, from the Kabbalistic sources, that every day of Bereshis represents 1 millennia of the history of mankind, and that every day of Bereshis has within it what was created on that day in some way is a prerequisite, almost, is a foundation for the 6 millennia. Chazal had this Masorah that the world will exist for 6,000 years, starting from the birth of Adam HaRishon. And we are in the year 5781. So we are in the 6th millennia. And what happens in the 6th millennia has got to do with what happens at the Bereshis, says the Ramban, on the 6th day of creation. So this is just one source where you see quite clearly that Chazal and the Rishonim understood that within the events of Sefer Bereshis lie indications for the future. Of course, this doesn't in any way cancel out human bechira, human free choice. Of course, on the individual level, everybody has got free choice. But on the national, or if you like, world level, there is a divine plan. Exactly, somebody once, one of my rabbonim, when I was younger, gave a very interesting moshel about this idea. It seems to be at first sight that God's predestination and human choice contradict each other. But he said, look, it's a bit like if a playwright writes a play for the theater. So the play is already written. We know exactly what's going to be the end of the play. We know exactly what the plot is going to be. We can read the play before we even see the theater piece. We can see the play, and it's all written. It's all written out in advance. But nevertheless, you as an individual, you can still decide whether you are going to play the part of a villain or part of a hero, or whether you're just going to be part of the background crowd who are going to be irrelevant to the plot. You can decide the degree of involvement you personally. Bechira is a personal concept. What role are you and I going to play as this plot unfolds? But the plot has already been written, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu has already written the future destiny of Klal Yisrael and of the world. And it's written out over six millennia. starting from the birth of Adam Rishon. Of course, the whole scientific concept of the world existing 13 billion years is not a contradiction to this at all, because all those billions of years happened before the birth of Adam Harishon. In other words, the 6 days of creation quite likely were many billions of years of dinosaurs and pterodactyls and various things and another. That's not a contradiction at all. But our counting is the counting of human history. So from the time there existed for the first time a Tselem Elokim, for the first time there existed a human being with a neshama, from then the clock starts ticking, and we are now in the 6th millennia. So this is just an interesting example, possibly one of the prime examples of the idea of what Sefer Bereshis really constitutes for us. But now we are standing at the threshold of Pesach and about to engage in the Haggadah. Everybody makes all sorts of different preparations for Pesach, but one of the preparations everybody should make is to learn a little bit of material which they can bring to the Seder night and engage in the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Right? Men and women equally are obligated in the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is telling over the story, telling over the ideas. Even if we've heard it 1,000 times before, it doesn't matter. Afilu kulonu chachamim, kulonu nevainim, kulonu yodim es haTorah. Even if we know the whole story, mitzvah aleinu lesaper. The mitzvah is to say it over. That is the mitzvah of v'higara televincha bayom hahu, to say it over and remind ourselves and remind everybody around the table, even if it's just one other person around the table, to engage, to re-engage with this story. So here's an interesting question. In terms of Sefer Bereshis, where in Sefer Bereshis are there events which are, if you like, foundational for the Seder night story? Where in Sefer, because the whole of the Seder night story, of course, revolves around Sefer Shmos. Shmos v'Eira b'I b'Shalach. Yetzias Mitzrayim doesn't happen in Sefer Bereshis. It happens in Sefer Shmos. Nevertheless, what I'd like to have a look at this morning is the way in which the author of the Haggadah, incidentally, we don't know who the author of the Haggadah was, the anonymous author of the Haggadah, the way in which he introduces something from Sefer Bereshis, which is very fascinating and worth thinking about. It's often glossed over when we do the Haggadah. So I say that actually we don't know who the author of the Haggadah is, but in fact we do have in the 10th chapter of Maseches Pesachim. If you have a look in the Mishnah on the 10th chapter, and we're going to have a look at that now together, and we're going to start off by learning a Mishnah together. The Mishnah gives us the basic building blocks of the Haggadah. It doesn't give us the text of the Haggadah, but it gives us the basic building blocks. What we need to do when we are saying the Haggadah, because all the Torah says is tell the story. But how are we supposed to tell it? What details are we supposed to say? What are the components? Incidentally, I just want to mention to you that this is a very common in halacha, that we find that, for example, the Torah tells us to say Birkas Hamazon. The Torah tells us 3 words: Ochalta, v'savata, uveirachta. Okay, but the Torah doesn't tell us exactly what to say. Right? It was left to Chazal to give us a text of Birkat Hamazon. Right? But when we say Birkat Hamazon, which are words written by Chachamim, by Chazal, we are in fact fulfilling a mitzvah min haTorah. The mitzvah min haTorah is v'chalta v'savota v'irachta. Even though the words, so in a sense, to say the words of Birkas Hamazon is a chiyuv midrabanon, but when we say them, we have a kiyum of a mitzvah doraisa. We're fulfilling one of the Tariq mitzvahs. And exactly the same thing is true on Seder night, that actually the words of the Haggadah were authored for us by Chazal, but when we do them, we are being Mekayim, we are fulfilling the mitzvah of the Higara Telavincha Bayomahu Lemar, to tell over the story and the events. So without further ado, I'd like to share with you the screen and have a look at a Mishnah and some other relevant material. This will take 1 minute because I can see I haven't set up my stuff yet. 1 second. Okay. Right. Okay, you see the text? Excellent. Forgive me, I haven't quite had my morning coffee yet this morning. Just forgive. Okay. Says the Mishnah in Pesachim. Mozgin lo kos sheni. Mozgu lo kos sheni. So means this. So the first Mishnah deals with saying the first cup of wine is Kiddush, right? So the first Mishnah deals with Kadesh Urchatz, Karpas Yachatz, and now Mozgu lo kos sheni. We're into the second cup of wine. Mozgu, as the English translator says, the attendants, the staff. I'm sure everybody in their house has got staff who pours the drinks for them and brings in the food. It's taken for granted in many ways that at every Seder table there are some domestic staff running the show behind the scenes, upstairs and downstairs, and I'm sure everybody has similarly domestic staff at a Seder night. If you don't, then I'm afraid you have to pour your own cup of wine. But so we're pouring the second. Right, the Mishnah started off by saying there are 4 cups of wine, and we're now in the second one. The Khan says V'kan haben shoel oviv, and the first thing that happens is that the son at the Seder table starts asking the questions. The Gemara says the son is lav dafka. The Mishnah uses the word the son because the Pasuk says v'garato lebincha, speaks about telling the story to your son, but actually it can equally be your daughter, it can be your wife, can be your husband, can be anybody around the table. Somebody has to ask a question. This is actually a very interesting aspect of the Haggadah, the idea that there's a special mitzvah to put it in a question and answer format. This is very much part of the Haggadah scene, as we all know, and the Mishnah emphasizes this by starting with what we know as the Manishtana, and the Manishtana, the text of the Manishtana, is here in this Mishnah. V'kan ben shoel oviv. Somebody starts asking the leader of the Seder starts asking the question, and then the Mishnah adds, "V'im ein da'as baben." If your child doesn't know how to do this because he's too young or too ignorant or one thing and another, oviv malamdo, then you're going to teach him. You're going to teach him to ask the question. In other words, the teaching doesn't start with giving the answer. The teaching begins with knowing how to ask questions properly. And indeed, the whole issue of questions and answers was something which occupied the minds of Chazal very much. So much so that, as we know, we've got 4 sons, each asking the question differently. And that's a whole, not my subject for this morning. There's a whole analysis among the 4 sons of how to ask and how to answer questions about Jewish identity and Jewish history and emunah. That's the 4 sons. But that's not my topic for the moment. But this is the first line of the Mishnah, which already gives us the idea that we have to fill, and this is also an interesting detail in the management of the Seder night, we fill the second cup of wine long before we drink it. And the second cup of wine is filled before we say Manishtana, as the Mishnah says, but we only drink it after we've completed the bracha at the end of Magid, right? right? The Asher Go'alonu v'Golas Hamaseinu Mitzrayim v'Yotzeinu Mi'avdos L'Chayros, right? That bracha at the end. Then we drink the second cup of wine. But what's important is that while we are telling the whole story, the filled cup of wine is present in front of us. In the same way as we say Kiddush, right? We fill the cup of wine, and then we recite the whole Kiddush over a full cup of wine. And similarly, Birkas Hamazon. If you have a cup of wine for Birkas Hamazon all year round, you fill the cup before benching, and then you say the whole Birkas Hamazon over the full cup of wine. So similarly, Magid, which is telling the story, is said with the cup of wine already filled. Mosgino Kosheni, and what does he ask? So here's the Mishnah. So this is the origin of the Mishnah, right? The famous Manishtana Halayla Hazem Mikol Halaylos, and why is tonight different? So we're focusing on the uniqueness of Seder night, and of course the answer is that the Seder night was the moment that Klal Yisrael went me'avdos l'cheiros, from slavery to freedom, and more than that, it was the moment that in fact Am Yisrael were created. It was the moment of the creation of the Jewish people, and everything we do on Seder night revolves around this idea. Manishtana halayla hazeh. So we know that. I'm not going to go through the whole Manishtana because you probably know it since you were in kindergarten. The first one is that on Seder night we only eat matzah and kolaleilos on opening chometz of matzah, and the second one is about moror. The third one you've never seen before. This third question in the Mishnah is a question which appears in the Mishnah, but is not something that we say. Okay, so just let's go back for a minute. This Mishnah was written 2,000 years ago at the time of the Beis Hamikdash. The Bayis Sheni was still standing when this Mishnah was written, because according to the text of this Manishtana, question number 3 is, that's what I've highlighted in front of you, that all other nights, if we're going to eat meat, sometimes it's roasted, sometimes it's cooked or fried, right? Halayla hazeh kulei tzali. But tonight, the meat that we're eating is tzali, has to be roasted. And that, of course, is a reference to what? It's a reference to the Korban Pesach, right? Where the Korban Pesach, the roast lamb meat of every Seder table in Yerushalayim, during the time of the Beis Hamikdash, they were eating the roast lamb of the. So that was the third question, right? And then the fourth question is the issue of dipping. Usually we only dip once, and now we're dipping twice. So which question do we put instead of the basal tzli? Unmute yourself and answer the question. What do we say in Manishtana?
Leaning,
exactly. Halayla hazeh kulona masubin. Right. This night we're leaning, and it's interesting that the Chachamim understood not just that we have to ask questions, that we have to ask 4 questions. The concept of 4 questions becomes very important here. And therefore, if number 3 is taken out, because we don't have Bosot Tzli anymore, we insert a 4th activity, which is unique to Seder night, which is that we eat and drink while leaning a bit to the left, even though leaning a bit to the left is a little bit uncomfortable for us, but it's symbolic. It's symbolic of the chayrus of earlier times. Okay. Again, there's a lot to say about the Manishtana, but again, it's not my topic for the moment. I've got something I want to get from this Mishnah, and then so first the questions are asked, and then the Mishnah says, "Ulafi dato shalbein oviv malamdo," right? And then, of course, he says the father, the person leading the Seder, has to now give the answer. Those were the questions. What's the answer? And now the Mishnah gives us 4 words here, which give us a bit of the structure of the Haggadah. As I said, there isn't a text of the Haggadah, but the structure. These 4 words, Matchil b'gnus u'masayim b'shevach. So what is gnus and shevach? So in a sense, this translates to mean we should start with a description of the difficulties, of the bad situation that the Jewish people were in. We shouldn't just speak about the great moment of redemption. We should first focus on the gnus, literally. How does he translate it with the gnus? What's a good translation for gnus? He begins with, he translated here, he begins with the Jewish people's disgrace. Gnus is the disgrace of the Jewish people and concludes with their glory. So the disgrace means that they were completely crushed by the slavery. But actually, the Gemara says there are 2 ways of understanding this principle. Matchil b'gnus u'masayim b'shevach, and the Gemara records a dispute between Rav and Shmuel. And one view is that we start the story by describing the suffering of the slavery, and that's the phrase, the phrase of Avodim Hayinu Lefaro b'Mitzrayim. Right, that's the gnus. That is the sadness. But the other view is that actually that's not the story of Seder night. So I just want to pause on this for a minute, because that's something which is quite fundamental to Seder night. That actually on Seder night we're telling 2 different stories. One is a story me'avdus l'cheirus, which starts with Avodim Hayinu Lefaro b'Mitzrayim, and it ends with Vayotzienu Hashem misham b'yad chazak of Israel Netuyah, HaKadosh took us out. But there's another story which is running parallel. It's almost as if there are 2 stories running side by side. And what is the other story? Anybody know what the other story is?
Spiritual.
A spiritual story, not a story which is couched in terms of slavery and freedom, but a story which is couched in terms of from paganism to emunah, right? And that's a different story. That sentence is a different story. That actually the story of Seder night has to be told on 2 levels. And it's not just suffering and then freedom and being able to shake off the yoke of the suffering and persecution of the Egyptians, but it's also about the growth, the spiritual growth of Klal Yisrael, that we arrived as a nation with emunah. And in actual fact, the great achievement of Klal Yisrael has been over the centuries to be able to preserve our emunah, even in times of a great opposition. We'll speak a bit more about that in a moment. Okay, let's go back to the screen for a second. So okay, so I've given you this Mishnah, but really the goal that I wanted to get to in reading this Mishnah is this last line. Look at this last line of the Mishnah. V'doresh me'arami oved ovi ad sheyigmar kol haparsha kula. That is a very interesting line in the Mishnah. That the Haggadah has to include that we have to learn Arami Oved Ovi. And the author of the Mishnah assumes that, of course, all the readers of the Mishnah are completely familiar off by heart with the text of the Chumash, and that when they say Arami Oved Ovi, everybody knows exactly what is being referred to. But we're going to have a look a moment a bit more closely. But then it says so interesting, Ad sheyigmar kol haparsha kula. From Arami Oved Ovi is a whole parsha. And that parsha has to be part of the Haggadah. Now, I want to have a bit of a closer look at that, because that story, Arami Oved Ovi, is our link to Sefer Bereshis. Arami Oved Ovi, and Sheyigmar Kol HaParsha Kula, has a reference to, an important reference to Sefer Bereshis, which is not so obvious what it means. Let's have a look a bit more closely at this. Right, so it starts right? So he translates Arami Obed Avi. He expounds from the passage, an Aramean tried to destroy my father, right? So this is Chazal interpreting these three words, Arami, right? So who is the Arami? So the Arami, so the truth is there were lots of people in Bereshis who came from Aram, right? Aram, just maybe a little bit of historical background. Aram was actually one of the descendants of Shem. If we're interested in Sefer Bereshis, you go back to say Parshas Noach and tells us about Shem, Cham, and Yafet, the three sons of Noach. So Shem has got several sons, and one of them is called Aram, Aleph Reish Mem. Aleph Reish Mem. And from Aram came a whole nation who lived in Mesopotamia, basically was modern Syria and parts of Iraq, right? That is the area of Aram. But they were a Semitic nation. What is Semitic? We automatically think of the word Semitic to be connected to the Jewish people, but actually the word Semitic relates to the name of Shem. Shem, one of the three sons of Noach, Shem, Cham, and Yafes, all the descendants of Shem were called Semitic nations, right? Semitic descendants of Shem. And Aram was also a descendant of Shem, and his language was Aramaic, Aramaic, which is very similar to Hebrew. So actually, the culture and the language of Aram was similar to Israel and Aramaic and the Jewish people, but they lived in a pagan world and they never entered into the world of Emunah and Avodas Hashem. But Avram Avinu himself comes from Aram Naharayim, right? Incidentally, it's called Naharayim sometimes, Aram Naharayim. Anyone know what Naharayim means? What is any offers on the word Naharayim?
Between the two rivers.
The two rivers, that's right. A Nahar is a river. And Naharayim doesn't just mean two rivers, it means a pair of rivers. And that was the Tigris and the Euphrates, which actually were the two lifelines through the whole of the country of Aram. And Avram Avinu comes from there. But Avram Avinu is never referred to in the Torah as an Arami. That's not how he's referred to. He's referred to as Avram HaIvri. Okay, that's already also an interesting subject. But so who is referred to in the Torah as the Arami? Who is the Arami? So who said that? Lavan, exactly. The author of our Haggadah suddenly brings into the Haggadah the person of Lavan. Let's have a quick look at the Rambam here for a minute. So the Rambam is giving us the halachic synopsis of that Mishnah we just learned. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but he starts off with Tzorech lahatchil b'gnus l'sayim b'shevach, right, to begin with disgrace and praise. And then how does he do that? He tells both stories. The Rambam says he must tell both stories. He says, first of all, he must tell the story, right? That we made a spiritual journey from a lack of emunah to a nation of emunah. And then v'chein, says the Rambam, this is the v'chein, similarly, we must tell a second story. And that is, we must tell the story of slavery to freedom. Okay. And then the Rambam says, Vahu, look what he writes here, the Rambam. He adds one or two words in his classic style. He says, Vahu, sheyidrosh me'arami oved ovi ad sheyigma kol parsha. So that is verbatim from the Mishnah, that he should learn this whole subject of Arami oved ovi, the whole parsha. But then the Rambam writes, V'chol ha'moisef u'ma'arich b'drosh parsha zu hareze meshubach. And any detail or any explanation we can add to this parsha, hareze meshubach, right? Mosif hareze meshubach, that the whole story of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is one where we are invited to add to it and to explain it more and to ask more questions. So that's what we're doing this morning. Hopefully it will be a contribution to your Seder night discussion. We're going to have a bit of a closer look at this. Here, the Rambam gives us a reference of Devarim, chapter 26, Pasuk 5. So what is really the context of Arami Oved Ovi? So I've written it here in one word. The context of this whole story is the mitzvah of Bikurim at the beginning of Parshas Kisova. It's a very unlikely text to bring into our Seder night. If you want to bring texts of Yetzias Mitzrayim, I would have thought that these texts should be brought from Shemos. There's no lack of psukim in Shemos dealing with the events of Seder night. And yet the Mishnah tells us, and the Rambam codifies it, that the psukim to use are the psukim from Bikurim. So when a Jewish landowner gets his first fruits, he has to put them in a basket. But look, here he comes with a basket, and he's got a bunch of grapes and a handful of olives in his basket, and he comes and he gives it to the kohen. Right, this is one of the Esrim Ba'arba Matnos Kahuna, one of the gifts given to the kohen is Bikurim. What's interesting though about the mitzvah of Bikurim is that uniquely, this is a mitzvah to give a gift to the kohen, but it's not enough to give it. As the Mishnah says, Mevi v'korei. There are two parts to this mitzvah. One mitzvah is to bring it to the kohen. The other one is that each person who brought the Bikurim, Korei, has to read a few psukim. Has to read a few psukim. And they probably had a Megillah there with these psukim written on it. And everybody who came in front of the kohen was given this Megillah, and he had to read this psukim. Incidentally, it might be interesting to know that the Tosfos on the Gemara says that the origin of having in shul, having a Baal Korei to read the Sefer Torah for us, goes back to this event, because the Mishnah says in Bikurim that actually everybody who brings Bikurim has to read these psukim himself from a manuscript, but the Chazal saw that some farmers were actually illiterate and they couldn't read. And they realized that because they couldn't read, they didn't want to be embarrassed, so they didn't bring Bikurim. They failed to do the mitzvah of Bikurim because they couldn't read. They didn't want to come before the kohen and stutter and make mistakes, etc. So they appointed a Baal Korei. They appointed a Baal Korei to read, and the minhag, as the Mishnah was, that the Baal Korei read for everybody, right? So as not to embarrass people. They didn't ask you, are you illiterate? And then bring in the Baal Korei. The Baal Korei reads for everybody, even if you can read for yourself. It's in an effort to make sure that no one gets embarrassed. And that's our minhag, says Tosfos, with Kriyas HaTorah and Shul. That even though you might know how to read the parsha yourself, we use the Baal Korei. Has anyone been in any Yemenite shul ever? A Yemenite a community? In the Yemenite communities, they still have the custom that if you get an aliyah, you read the Torah. Whoever gets an aliyah, he himself reads the Torah. And the assumption is that there's no such thing as an illiterate person. It's amazing to think that for many, many centuries, millennia, in the Yemenite community, they were so confident that everybody was completely literate, not just literate, they could read, but you were able to read flawlessly from an unpunctuated text of the Sefer Torah, right? And if you got an aliyah, you had to read the parsha. I remember many years ago, we came to Israel for a couple of weeks, and we were staying in one of the suburbs of Yerushalayim, and I woke up in the morning very early, and I went to shul. I didn't know the area at all. I'd spotted a shul down the road. I walked into the shul. It was still about 6:30 in the morning. I was still a bit groggy, and I start taking off my tefillin, and I realized as I was going that the davening was a little bit different to what I'm used to. And sure enough, it was a Yemenite minyan. I'd stumbled into a Yemenite minyan. They're very friendly and very welcoming. But of course, I was their token Ashkenazi. You know what I mean? I was the Ashkenazi. So it was I think a Thursday morning, and they started Kriyas HaTorah. So they called up a Kohen, and he read his parsha. So I thought, oh, that's nice. The Kohen is the Baal Koreh. And then what happened was they called up a Levi, and he read his parsha. So then I realized this is not simple, right? I had a ominous feeling that as a guest in the shul, I was going to get shlishi. Okay, so I quickly had a look at it. It was a bit of a complicated piece. So it came to shlishi. He says, "Yeah, Amod," and then the Gabbai looked at me with a particular sort of questioning face. Basically, he was asking me, are you a competent Hebrew reader, or are you one of these ignorant Ashkenazim that we sometimes get wandering into here? Are you one of those ignorant people who can't read? So I shook my head. I was tempted to say yes and try and go through it, because I knew it sort of. But after hearing the first two people laying absolutely perfectly with every dogesh and every letter and everything perfectly, I thought I'd rather not embarrass myself. I'm going to. So he says, "Oh, Chaim, come here, come here." So it comes over a 9-year-old kid. He called over like a 9-10-year-old kid who was waiting in the wings and was obviously thrilled that an ignorant Ashkenazi had appeared in their shul. Now, for him, this was a gift for this little kid. He was totally thrilled to have the opportunity, and they gave him the Sefer Torah. And in the Eidot HaMizrach, in the Nusach Sfard minhag is that the Baal Koreh doesn't need to be bar mitzvah. The Baal Koreh just needs to be competent. So here was an under bar mitzvah kid with an incompetent rabbi getting an aliyah here at his in his shul, and the kid read flawlessly, absolutely flawlessly. But it was a slightly embarrassing moment for me, but it was interesting. It was a learning experience for me. That here it is, Rabbi Say. If you ever feel you might be wandering into a Yemenite minyan, prepare in advance to lane a parsha. Anyhow, so the farmers who came to bring their bikurim were often unable to lane by themselves from a sefer, these psukim. So there was a Baal Koreh, and that's our minhag. So as not to embarrass anybody, the Baal Koreh lanes for everybody. But let's go back to the text now. Let's have a look. What did the person bringing bikurim, what did he have to say? So he has to say these psukim, which become center stage of our Haggadah. And this is an amazing thing, right? That our Haggadah, the Mishnah tells us that a very important component of our Haggadah are these psukim, right? And everybody here at this shir has been at numerous Seder nights, and we've all learned these psukim, starting with the two words, Tzei Ulmad. Tzei Ulmad, right? And I'll speak about those two words in a minute. Tzei Ulmad have got a very specific meaning, but it means we must go out, so to speak, and learn. Go out and learn means we have to learn this in depth. We have to learn it not just superficially. We have to know what's going on here. Right, so the first pasuk starts with the word Arami Oved Avi, Vayered Mitzrayma, Vayagasham Bimsei Ma'at, Vayisham L'Goy Gadol Otzu V'Rov. Right, my father. Okay, so here's an interesting thing, that the English translator here doesn't translate it the way that the Haggadah translates it. Because Arami Oved Avi can mean, who is the Arami? The Arami can either be the pursuer or the pursued. The word Oved is ambiguous. So he translated here as, for example, my father was a fugitive Aramean. So basically, he's referring to Yaakov. Right? And indeed, many of the Mefarshim, the Ben Ezra and other of the Pshat Mefarshim say that Ramin Ovi means that my father, Yaakov, was a wandering Aramean, wandering in the sense he had no fixed home. He was still living in tents, right? And he was an Arami in the sense that Avram Avinu came from Aram. That's the simple Pshat, but that's not what the Haggadah wants us to learn from this pasuk. The Haggadah wants to learn something else completely. We'll come to that in a minute. By Yoreo Asana Mitzrayim, pasuk number 2 is that the Egyptians oppressed us. They Havilev Nitzak Hashem. We daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We all know these psukim. We daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He heard our tefillos, and then Yitzias Mitzrayim. Yitzeinu Hashem Misham B'Yad Chazaka B'Zrayim Tuyo Osos V'Movsim. Right. So these are in fact the 4 psukim that we read in the Haggadah, right? And it's starting with the word Arami Ovedovi. If you have a look here in the Haggadah text, so where do we say Arami? So we start here as follows. So this will be familiar to everybody who's paid any attention during Seder night. Although the truth is, by the time you get to Tzeil Mad, some people are really a little bit have already overdosed on Divrei Torah, and at Kadesh, Urchatz, Karpas, Yachatz, Magid, they've heard Divrei Torah about Holach Ma'anya and about Ma'anishtana, and they've heard about Avodim Hayinu and Mitzchila Ovdi Avodah Zarah Yavaseinu, and by the time it comes to Tzeil Mad, people tend to sort of change gear and zip through the text here. But bear in mind that the Rambam says that Dafka here in this parsha, we should focus, and we should look at it more closely. And what happens here is that Chazal give a very interesting perush to the Arami. Who was the Arami? So look at this. This is straight out of the Medrash. Says the Reb Medrash, Ma bikesh lovon Arami, lasos liYaakov Avinu. So the Chazal are using here a little bit of midrashic style interpretation that Arami is Lovon and Oved Ovi means he from ibud, holech ibud, means getting lost, getting destroyed, right? So he says that Lovon tried to destroy my father. Arami Oved Ovi. Lovon tried to destroy my father by Yered Mitzrayim, and he went down to Egypt, and he was there, and he became a great nation in Egypt. What does it mean he became a great nation in Egypt? That actually the Jewish people, the Goy here means the nation, right? It's important to remember, incidentally, the word Goy, we tend to use the word Goy in its Yiddish interpretation, right? In Yiddish, a Goy means a non-Jew. In biblical Hebrew, a Goy means a nation, and actually usually refers to the Jewish people, right? When HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises Avraham Avinu, the Eschol Goy Godol, I'll make you into a great nation, he doesn't mean I'll make you into a great Goy, right? A Goy is the Yiddish understanding of the word Goy, and it's very curious that in our brachas in the morning, we say Shalom Astani Goy, and we use the word Goy there to mean a non-Jew, but that's the Yiddish interpretation of the word Goy, not the Hebrew interpretation. So here you have a pasuk which says explicitly that the Jewish people, by Hisham L'Goy Godol, became a great nation. That the Jewish people came, right, at Har Sinai, the Jewish people were promised they would become Mamleches Kohanim V'Goy Kodesh, right, become a holy nation. So the word Goy usually refers to the Jewish people, and it means a nation, but it's been adapted and adopted in Yiddish, and surprisingly, even in our brachas, to mean actually a non-Jew. That's just a footnote here in this text. But what struck my curiosity, and this is an interesting question to ask at Seder night, look at this. Look at this statement here. Sheparo lo goza ela al hazorim, v'lovon bikesh la'akor esakol. a most extraordinary statement. The whole of Seder night is about the evil of Paro and how Paro gets punished and Paro has to endure the 10 makkos and Paro eventually gets drowned in the Yam Suf, and Paro is the arch villain of the Seder night. And suddenly we're told, almost as by the way, that we had an enemy of the Jewish people who preceded Paro, right, by a couple hundred years. And who was that? Lovon. And in a certain sense, he was worse than Paro. Paro lo goza el al-Zchorim, right? Look at this. The Pharaoh only decreed death on the males, but Lovon sought to uproot the whole people. Lovon bikesh la'akar es hakol. That Lovon was a greater enemy because he wanted to destroy the whole of the Jewish people. And let me ask you a question: what is that God referring to here? So this is Parshas Vayetze, right? Parshas Vayetze is the parsha of Yaakov and Lavan. Yaakov lives for 20 years in Lavan's house, and indeed, Rashi there on Parshas Bikurim, Rashi there in Devarim chapter 26, he says, Arami Obed Avi, Mazkir Chazdei HaMakom. Arami Obed Avi, so Rashi brings down the commentary of the Haggadah. Lovon Bikesh La'akos HaKol. Kisherodav Acha Yaakov, and Rashi adds something very interesting. Ubishvil Shechoshav Las. Any idea what that, does anybody want to offer what that could possibly mean? What does he mean here, Rashi? Bishvil Shechoshav Las. So it means here that Lavan actually didn't do anything bad to Yaakov at all. Nobody died as a result of Lavan's bad intentions, but Choshav Lasas, he had evil intentions. So here's an interesting thing. Let me just give you a 2-minute background here. I'm sure you've all read and learned Parshas Vayetze more than once, but I just want to refer to a few details as they relate to our Haggadah. What happens actually? Yaakov is fleeing from Esav. Esav wants to kill him. End of Parshas told us, right? And he finds refuge in the house of Lavan Harami, right? His family. And he stays there for 20 years. 7 years for Rachel, 7 years for Leah, and an additional 6 years in order to accumulate wealth of sheep and goats and a whole flock he became a wealthy man, right? During the time that he is in Lavan's house, what happens to him? So he arrives, according to Rashi, and according to the chronology of the Psukim, he's already not a young man anymore. He's already in his 70s. And he arrives in Lavan's house, and he's unmarried and penniless and lonely, right? And he arrives in Lavan's house. 20 years later, he leaves with 4 wives, 11 children, and a wealthy man. So actually, in the house of Lavan, he prospers. He grows enormously, right? He has lots of children, and he leaves with a lot of wealth, right? So what's going on here exactly? And that is the story. But Lavan is seen here as his arch enemy. So there's something very profound happening here. We do see that Lavan tries again and again to try and get Yaakov to stay longer. Stay longer. Don't leave. Right? That was the whole reason why he switched Rachel and Leah. And he wants 7 years for Rachel and 7 years for Leah. And then when he wants to leave, he says, no, please don't leave. Tell me, what would it take to get you to stay? Right? What every employer says to a key employee who says, I'm leaving, he says, what would it take to get you to stay? I don't want you to leave. Please stay. You're the key to my success. Right? Says Lavan, I've only been successful because of you. Right? So Yaakov wants to, he wants to, again and again and again, he wants Yaakov to stay. Chazal understood that Lavan's intentions weren't just economic issues of wealth. Lavan's intention were that he wanted to undermine, to derail, if you like, Yaakov from his life's ambition, which was to be a descendant of Avram and Yitzchak, and to carry the emunah of Avram and Yitzchak into the next generation and to build Klal Yisrael. And Lavan tried to get him, if we have to use an English word that we are more familiar with, Lavan's efforts were to try and get Yaakov to assimilate. That's what he wanted him to do. He wanted Yaakov to become a good Aramean, to become a successful and wealthy and powerful Aramean. And he gives him more and more wealth and more prestige, and he praises him. And when Yaakov eventually leaves, Lavan can't believe that he's left. And he pursues him. On the third day that he left, Lavan hears that Yaakov has left, and he pursues him, and he runs after him, and he says to him, I could do terrible things to you, right? But HaKadosh Baruch Hu appeared to me in a dream and told me not to touch you, right? But really everything that you've got is mine. It's my daughters and my grandchildren, and it's my wealth. In other words, he denies completely that Yaakov has any right to exist and has any personal belongings of any sort. Now, what's interesting here, now I'm going to shift to the Vilna Gaon. Says the Vilna Gaon, and this is really a key to what I wanted to say here for the Seder night. Says the Vilna Gaon, the whole Yetzias Mitzrayim story is already coded into Parshas Vayetze. I want you to stick with me on this. In other words, Yaakov went down to Egypt because he was starving. He was going to die of starvation, and he needed food, right? So Egypt was a refuge for him, right? This was similar to Yaakov coming to the house of Lavan, and in Lavan's house he found a refuge from Esav. So the original coming down was onus al pi adibo. In other words, it was something which he didn't really want to do. So like Yaakov goes into Lavan's house, he didn't really want to do it. He had to. Circumstances forced him. Similarly, circumstances forced Klal Yisrael to go down to Mitzrayim. Secondly, in Mitzrayim, Vayirbu, Vayatzu, B'mod Ma'od, they were prolific, right? The nation of the Jewish people in Mitzrayim grew and mushroomed enormously, right? That the Chazal say Shisha B'keres Echad. And the only thing that has to be taken literally necessarily, not every woman gave birth to sextuplets each time she gave birth, but there were multiple births, and they grew from a small family into a massive nation, right? By the time they went out 210 years later, they were 600,000 men, 603,550 men over 20. So it grew into a massive nation, right? Just like Yaakov arrives in Lavan's house, he has no children, right? So similarly, Yaakov comes with his sons down into Mitzrayim, and it's a very, very small family. Now, in other words, the environment, even though from a spiritual point of view, the environment is hostile, but from a family point of view, that's where they flourished. So Yaakov flourishes in exile. Klal Yisrael also flourish in exile. Similarly, when Yaakov leaves, he leaves a wealthy man, right? And similarly, in the Mitzrayim story, point number 3, Klal Yisrael left Mitzrayim wealthy, right? So here you have 3 very, very interesting parallelisms between Parshas Vayetze and Yetzias Mitzrayim. It says in Parshas Vayetze is already coded in the events that would take place several hundred years later, that like Yaakov goes into Lavan's house, and despite Lavan's attempts to try and get him to assimilate and to lose his identity, he maintains Melamed Shehoyim Mitsuyonim Sham. If you read these 4 psukim, and what the Haggadah tells us about these 4 psukim, it's talking about the Jews in Egypt, but it could equally be talking about Yaakov's life in Parshas Vayetze in Lavan's house. They were Mitsuyonim, they kept their clothing, they kept their identity, they kept their names, they kept their integrity. Like Yaakov kept his integrity, they kept their integrity. And finally, it's very interesting that Lavan hears by Yom HaShlishi, the pasuk says, Lavan hears that Yaakov has left, and he runs after him by Yirdof Acharov to try and kill him, right? Which is exactly what happens with Paro. Paro hears by Yom HaShlishi, the third day that the Jewish people left Egypt. Paro hears that they've left, and by Yirdof Achareim, and he pursues them. And of course, in the end, he gets drowned in the Yam Suf. But there are several major parallels, says the Vilna Gaon, between Lavan and trying to get Yaakov to abandon his identity and his emunah and to become an assimilated Aramean, and the Jewish people in Egypt who resisted assimilation, who became Mitsuyonim, who became distinctive and individualistic in Egypt, and they also they were prolific in having children, and they became wealthy. And in actual fact, and here comes an interesting point, says the Vilna Gaon. What does the Baal Haggadah want to tell us here? So the first thing he wants to tell us, in terms of our shiurim, he wants to tell us that Sefer Bereshis contains within it the master plan of the whole of Jewish history, and therefore in Parshas Vayetze you get the whole plan of Yetzias Mitzrayim is in Parshas Vayetze, and that's why the Mishnah tells us we should learn that parsha properly. We should learn it well, because in that story, Tzei Ulmad. Incidentally, Tzei Ulmad, just a couple of words about the word Tzei. Tzei is an interesting word. I can't give you a whole shir without giving you at least one gematria, right? Some people love gematrias, some people get annoyed by gematrias. So, but whatever it is, the word Tzei itself has got a very interesting symbolic meaning, because the word Tzei is gematria 91. Okay, the gematria 91 is quite an important gematria in the general gematriologists' world in the Kabbalistic system, because as you know, the Shem Hashem, the name of our Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? Wherever we see the Shem Hashem written in the Torah, which is written Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey, right? The Shem Havaya, we never say it like that, right? We never pronounce it the way it's written. It's a Creek Siv. In other words, it's written one way and it's pronounced another way. We pronounce it Aleph Daled Nun Yud. That's how we pronounce when we read Yud Kei Vav Kei, right? So these two names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, one is, if you like, the hidden name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the ineffable name. We don't pronounce it because it refers to something beyond our concept, the Shem Hashem. And Aleph Daled Nun Yud is the way we relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? So these two words actually have an interesting relationship with each other. Haven't got time to subject for a whole share really, but in terms of gematria, Yud Kei Vav Kei is a gematria of 26, right? And Aleph Daled Nun Yud is a gematria of 65, and together they make up 91. But 91 is a combination of the Nigle and the Nista, of the hidden Shem Hashem and the vocalized Shem Hashem. Right, the ultimate Nigle and Nista combination of these two words, Yud Kei Vav Kei and Aleph Daled Nun Yud, right? And they are gematria 91. So Tzei Ulmad means read this parsha and understand that in the story of Lavan there is a Nigle and a Nista. There is something which is the obvious narrative about Yaakov in Lavan's house and one thing and another, but there's a Nista. What is the Nista? Says the Vilna Gaon. The Nista, the hidden narrative here, is a precursor of the whole Yetzias Mitzrayim story, is written in Parshas Vayetze, up to and including Lavan running after Yaakov with intent to destroy him and not being able to do so. Everything in Parshas Vayetze, and when you read through these psukim, right, you should recall the way in which it's a parallel to Yetzias Mitzrayim. I see time is running out. I'd just like to end with one thing, that in fact in our Haggadah we only take 4 psukim out of Parshas Bikurim, because that's the story of the Haggadah. But actually, if we look in Parshas Bikurim, how many psukim are there? So if you have a look in the parsha of Bikurim, right? So we read these 4 psukim. Seder night is full of number 4, right? 4 questions, 4 caps. So 1 is Arami Obed Avi. The second is Vayoreo Asanu HaMitzrim. The third is Vanitzak, we davened. The fourth is Vayotzienu Hashem Mitzrayim, and that's it. That's all we read in the Haggadah. But the truth is, here as well, there's a Nigler and a Nista. There's something hidden. And what is hidden? The hidden one is Postuk number 5. Vayivienu el hamokeim hazeh. Vayitzen lanu es ha'oretz hazos eretz zobas cholov udvash. The 5th posuk that the farmer has to say when he brings his Bikurim is, look what's happened. The end station was Eretz Yisrael. You brought us here to Eretz Yisrael, and you see these fruits. These might look like a handful of olives and a bunch of grapes, but they aren't. They're much, much more than that. They are the product of a land, and that land, we only arrived at that land after going through the whole of the Lavan story and the whole of the Mitzrayim story, and they, in a sense, represent our emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the hashkach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu protecting us and bringing us here. So when Baruch Hashem, we are all able to live in Eretz Yisrael and enjoy Eretz Yisrael, even though I personally and temporarily have been ejected from Eretz Yisrael in order to participate in the family simcha. But my mind, Libi Bamizrach, my mind is still in Yerushalayim. And when you say the Haggadah on Seder night, after you finish those 4 psukim of Tzei Umad, open a Sefer Dvarim, the beginning of Parshas Kisavai, and have a look and read the 5th pasuk, because that 5th pasuk is actually the finale, is the goal. But we don't say it on Seder night because Seder night is meant to be said in Galus, right? We are still in Galus. We don't yet have Yerushalayim Habanuya, right? When we say when we speak about Yerushalayim on the Seder night, right? We mean Yerushalayim Habanuya, the fully rebuilt Yerushalayim. Please God, we should all get together and enjoy Shlosha Regalim in its full sense, and bring a Korban Pesach in its full way. And but for the meantime, I hope I've added a little bit to your Seder night. When you get to Tzei Omad, say a few words about the word Tzei. Tell a few stories about Yaakov in Lavan's house, and his danger there was that Lavan would swallow him up culturally. Lavan never wanted to hurt him, never wanted to kill him. He wanted to keep him. He loved him, right? He wanted him to stay. He was the secret of Lavan's success, but he didn't want him to live a life of emunah and Yerushalayim and continue in his destiny. And that was really the greatness of Klal Yisrael and the strength that Klal Yisrael had to resist the opposition, the persecution of Paro and the temptation of Lavan. And that is really an idea to share with everybody at Seder night. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. That's all I've got time for this morning.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Kimche. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Mazel tov.
Thank
Thank you very much.
A great pleasure. Always lovely
Thank
to
you,
see
Rabbi.
you. Annie, lovely to see you. And
Thank
George,
you.
Paul and Murray.
Not forgetting the gematria of Amen is also 91.
The gematria of Amen is also 91. You're absolutely right, because Amen is actually acknowledging that the Shem Hashem is Nigler and Nista. There are lots of things we can see overtly, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in this world, but we recognize that in addition to what's overt, there's also the hidden, which we can't express completely, the understanding of the neshama, the understanding of the Shem Hashem properly. Thank you, Danny. Amen is also 91, exactly right.
Thank you.
That's it. Nice to see you all. I wish you a Chag Kosher v'Sameach. Enjoy Yontov. I'll be thinking of Yerushalayim here in London, and please God, we will get back very soon.